Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming to the stage Vice Admiral Peter Daly, U.S. Navy retired, publisher and Chief Executive Officer of the U.S. Naval Institute.
Thank you. We're heading towards the finish line here, and I would like to thank Lockheed Martin once again for sponsoring today's town hall with the Sea Service leaders. It's become a hallmark of West to end the conference in a discussion with the Sea Service chiefs. And I invite General Robert Neller, Commandant of the Marine Corps, Admiral John Richardson, Chief of Naval Operations, and Admiral Charles Ray, Vice Commandant of the Coast Guard, to join me on stage. Thank you. Sir, how are you? Good to see you.
Good. All right, you got to sit over here, Sam.
Good to see you, Charlie.
Sam.
All right.
Okay.
Well, again, we're very honored to have Admiral John Richardson, who's the 31st Chief of Naval Operations, General Neller, who's the 37th Commandant of the Marine Corps, and Admiral Charlie Ray, who's the 31st Vice Commandant of the Coast Guard, here today. We'll do a few questions up front. We'll get into a discussion, think of things that you'd like to ask. And the only request I have is that for today's town hall, I'd like to try to let the attendees from industry, maybe some of our enlisted superior performers, and some of our other guests get to the mic and hold off from the press questions for a bit. But so ponder your questions and we'll get started. And I'll get started here with Admiral Richardson. You know, we've heard you talk, about how the Navy is a learning engine, and how are you posturing to accelerate that development?
No, thanks. That's a great question. And let me just pile on to what you say. And this is maybe the fourth or fifth time I've had the chance to be here at West. And every single time it just gets a little bit better, a little bit more substantial. And I think that this iteration, this instantiation of it really so. Thanks for doing everything that you've invested in it to make it that way.
Well, thank you.
Yeah. Hey, with respect to this idea of the Navy as a learning organization, a learning engine, I really think that as we move into this security environment, which is a very fast-moving environment, and we could go on and on about the metrics that would support that, we've just got to make sure that from an intellectual standpoint, from a material standpoint, from a creativity standpoint, whether it's prototyping and innovating our way forward, we've got to be learning faster than our rivals. And so we've put a number of things in place. And we started talking about high-velocity learning in 2016. And we are sort of upping the game here in 2018 by putting in a number of things. So certainly if you think about how the Navy learns, well, we've got our schools, we've got the Naval Academy, the Naval Postgraduate School. I was up in Monterey on my way here. We've got the Naval War College up in Newport. The Marine Corps and the Coast Guard have their schools, so there's that. There's our training institutions. But there's also our war games. There's also our fleet exercises. There's also our fleet experiments. There's our analytical agenda. All of these things contribute to learning. And we've been trying to really get these gears to mesh for a number of years now, and everybody's been all in. But it is this idea of the problem to solve. And so it was when the National Defense Strategy made very clear that we've got this great power problem to solve. Boy, now it's really starting to run. The gears are coming together. The engine's starting to produce some power. And in fact, when you think about all of those elements across the Navy, a global Navy, we decided that we really need to put somebody in charge of that as the conductor of that global orchestra. And so we're going to stand up a 3-star position, the N7, the Director of Warfighter Development, and he's going to put it all together to make sure this all stays both coherent and focused on the problem we need to solve.
Thank you. You know, one of the things you mentioned in the comparison to past Wests, and one of the things that really sticks out for me this year is there seems to be more clarity about who the adversary or potential adversary is, and the fact that time is precious.
Yep.
And so that makes a lot of sense. And for General Neller, I was going to ask you, you know, one of the things that's come up maybe the most during our discussions this week is information operations and operating in that environment. And the Marine Corps has taken some steps to take that on and organize for that. And I'd like to ask you about those efforts.
Well, the domain of information, I mean, we used to talk about air, land, and sea, then we talked about space, talk about cyber, and then you have information. But information rides on space and cyber. So information has become weaponized, whether it's in phase 0 or phase 3. Your adversary can use information. Social media facilitates that. So Intel looks on information spaces, and not just information that we use to operate and to target and to maneuver, but information to shape the environment. So I think everybody's recognized that, and Marine Corps historically has been, and that includes the electromagnetic spectrum. So the Marine Corps has always been aggressive with radio battalions, electromagnetic spectrum, but I think we opened the aperture and we realized that we needed to increase the number of Marines in cyber, increase the number of Marines that are doing intel and targeting, Marines that were doing electronic warfare, and so those units all resided in the MEF, underneath the MEF headquarters group, but they were more of a custodial command. So we've operationalized the MEF headquarters group to make them the MEF information group, and added a number of people to that organization, which will help the MEF and the division, the wing, and the logistics group to operate in this domain, not just to do cyber protection, protect their networks, but to monitor information, to use information to facilitate operations. So, you know, at the end of the day, there's a way to be effective on the battlefield, not just kinetically. So you've got to tie it all together. We've always been a combined arms force. We've always used these other capabilities, and so I think now we've just expanded the aperture, and I think it's going to make us more effective on the modern battlefield, whether it be against somebody at the lower end, like the counterterrorism. I mean, the terrorists, ISIS has a huge information campaign, and you wonder, talk about the physical caliphate. How do you destroy something that's an idea and resides in the information domain? We understand the physical place, the geography, but how do you attack that information space? And so we're in a different place than we were 10, 15 years ago. And I think everybody in this room recognizes that, but we have to develop capabilities to compete in those areas, and that's what we're trying to do.
Well, before I go to the Coast Guard, I wanted to fold back on one thing that I think is the intersection maybe of these two things that we've just talked about. You know, gosh, depending on who you talk to, it's the end of the Cold War, or maybe it's post 9/11. But we've been in a fairly permissive environment, and now with this clarity, this alacrity of the defense strategy, we know where we need to be at the high end. And it strikes me that our commanders out there and our commanding officers have had the luxury in some cases of only having to think in 1 or 2 or 3 domains when they've had for instance, if you're in Fallujah, the intensity on the ground was just that, but you had air superiority. And now you can't claim that. You've got to earn it. And there's the whole issue of getting to the fight. So how do you change the mindset with learning and embracing new domains? The Army's calling it multi-domain operations. I'd say the Naval Force has always kind of been there. But how do you change the thinking of people to get them to integrate everything? Because it seems like that's hard to do, to turn that large ship.
we got to put them in a situation where they're not comfortable. I mean, when was the last time a Marine infantryman looked up other than for a friendly airplane? Now you got to look up for potentially enemy UAV or an enemy aircraft. So you got to put people, as we're trying to do in training, both live and in simulation, to force them to realize that the adversary is probably going to have long-range precision fires. The adversary is going to be able to GPS jam. The adversary's got the potential to take away your network. The adversary has an air force. The adversary has the same capabilities that you do, and in some cases, the quality of those capabilities are on par, or maybe in some cases a little bit better. So, you're right, for the last 17 years, we fought a very worthy adversary, but they were fairly rudimentary. They believed in their cause and they're willing to die. And we fought them and we were very successful. Now we've got to put ourselves in a different place. So, I mean, that's kind of the dilemma that all the services, and to include our Coast Guard shipmates, you know, we've got to train and we've got to provide forces for the current fight. We got to modernize the force we have because we've been running it hard, and we got to at the same time modernize this force for what we think might happen in the future. So the training environment, and it goes back to what the CNO is talking about, being a learning, growing, recognizing organization. You know, we train for a mission and we deploy the force, but we educate the force to recognize that the mission they're into might not be what they thought it was going to be when they left the pier.
I'll tell you what, I couldn't agree more with what the Commandant said, is that you've got to take the team, if you will, to the stressful point, the breaking point almost. And there's a book, I think Trent Holm was here earlier, yes. And so this book, Learning War, that he wrote is a great one. And it talks about, the Navy is a learning organization all through the interwar period, but then when combat broke out in World War II, we still had a lot to learn. And there's a lot of similarities. Technology coming into the situation, and in terms of complexity, multi-domain thinking, these commanding officers that were trying to imagine and gain the upper hand in these engagements, many of them at night, using visual types of cues. It's a multi-dimensional chess game, and then you throw on radar. Right now, it's truly information overload. It exceeded the capacity of any single person to visualize everything. And so what did they do? Well, all people like over here, these high-performing junior folks, the officer and enlisted, got together and invented CIC, right? And they invented the Combat Information Center on the fly to manage this information and then provide the commanding officer with a picture that they could use to win. We've got to get that type of creative innovation going, and it happens on board our ships, in our squadrons, et cetera, in our units, and then boils up, right? The best ideas happen there. But you got to get the war games and everything to get prototypically difficult to get to that stressful point where you crack open the creativity. And that's going to be, we talk about multi-domain, it's going to be multi-agency. And so this is where, in particular, partnering with the Coast Guard, Charlie, with your unique authorities, a lot of this is going to be law enforcement and things that we've got to partner together. And so the Coast Guard contribution to this maritime team is going to be huge.
Thank you. So, Admiral Ray, one of the things that you've been out there on is the issue of readiness, the importance of just basic readiness of the force. Can you talk about how you view your current readiness and where you see yourself going in terms of your major requirements, things that may need more attention?
Thanks for the question. I think without a doubt we've demonstrated in the past couple of years, if you just look at the hurricane season, our ability to surge and go to where we needed to be, the readiness that is a hallmark of our coasties. But readiness is fragile, and it's not anything you can take for granted. And so when the Commandant came in this past June, and he and I and the other senior leadership team, we kind of talked and gave ourselves a grade. And we've done pretty good at recapitalization of our 50-year-old assets. We've at least got a way ahead. National security cutters and offshore patrol cutters and other assets. And when we kind of graded ourselves, we said, we've really maybe not done as much as we should do when it comes to the most important part of readiness, and that's the coasties. That's the folks that you see out here and that we have all over. And so we are really focused on the kind of the accession, the recruiting, the accession, the training, the retention. None of those things can you take for granted. And so we are laser focused on we've got 3 or 4 lines of effort along that with regards to what's the rate we found, or the rate at which women coasties leave the service exceeds the rate of kind of the rest of the population. So we got to understand that, why that is, and adjust our policies and procedures accordingly. So, because that's just too valuable a workforce to lose. And we're trying to understand it in detail, our coasties, because they are the ones that are the center of gravity of our readiness. Now we've also got, we need operations and maintenance money. There's the other part of this, the spare parts and the training facilities and all those other things that aren't directly related to a capital asset, but you got to have as enablers. And we quite frankly haven't had the benefit of the support in the last couple of years. As I look across the river, and I'm thankful Department of Defense has got this emphasis on readiness, we're barely keeping up with inflation. And so that's a drum that we keep beating. So combination of just the funds it takes to build the infrastructure, the spares and other things, and then laser focus on the people that are the readiness.
If you had to pick a couple things, knowing that we're to the left of the Pres Budge, which comes out, I think, on March 12th, but what are a couple things that are on your list that you would defend maybe with Congress and say, these are things that we can't trade away?
Well, I think we're looking at our investment in training for our workforce, and we've kind of, quite frankly, we've squeezed that out as much as we can out of that while still remaining, viable with regards to preparing our young folks to do what they need to do. I was just up at Kodiak, Alaska yesterday, and I talked to our guys. We just got C-130Js and kind of talked to them about how we brought that airplane on, and as I listened to those folks, and they take a lot of pride in their availability and readiness, but I thought to myself, we could do a better job of preparing folks for the long haul with this. And so I think training for operational fields that we're doing, there's no doubt in my mind we need to do better investing and kind of move that forward. And then I think the enablers behind that with regards to our family support and making it, I got up to Kodiak, it was blowing 50 knots down the runway yesterday when we landed. And that was sporty, but it was interesting, and I go there, and I couldn't help but remark on the resilience of our folks there. They're still taking their kids out for walks. They're walking the dog, and that's what lives. Any other place they would name that a storm, and they just called it Thursday in Kodiak. So my point is I've got to honor the resilience of those people and make sure we take care of the folks that are on the pointy end.
The Norwegians say there's no such thing as bad weather, it's just bad clothes.
That's right.
Exactly. Well, on the DoD side, of course, I always think of this in terms of the framework of Secretary Mattis's memo from a few years ago, where he said, we've got to fix readiness, then move on to lethality and improved capability. But readiness is always there, and I was going to throw this over to the CNO and the Commandant to talk about what your view of readiness and things that you either think you have momentum on that you have to preserve, or something that's on your list.
Yeah, I'll tell you, and the Commandant can provide his own perspective, but I think that there's no doubt that we do have some momentum with respect to recovering readiness, and the metrics of that are all around us, really. And so one of the challenges is just sort of conveying and talking about readiness in tangible terms that get people excited and focused. But I'll tell you, starting in 17, we got some extra money at the end of 17 to get moving on readiness. I think we all benefited from that. 18 was a good story, and 19 even better, a good story and on time. And boy, that type of consistent, predictable, adequate funding, there's just no substitute for that in terms of building and maintaining momentum in a program. And I'll tell you, the Navy in particular, we're kind of a capital-intensive force. You start to do big things with warships, lots of readiness, maintenance. That whole industry thrives on reducing risk by being predictable, right? And so that's, that part is coming into a better place. Our training and certification, we're out there steaming more, flying more, and all of that helps readiness. It also has a bit of a reflection in that it starts to improve retention. I mean, our sailors, they join the Navy to go out and do what Navies do, right? They want to drive around high-end warships. They want to fly high-performance aircraft, and the more that we can make those platforms ready to go do that, to submerge and do what submarines do, to get into cyberspace and do what information warfare folks do, we've got to have all of those pieces in place to let them go do that, and then it becomes a pretty satisfying experience, right? It becomes like a pretty good life. You're working for a very noble organization. You're doing the thing you signed up to do. What could be better?
No, I remember back when, in the early 2000s, when they were looking very closely, the Navy was looking very closely at the enterprise approach, and they found that there was the RAG squadron in Lemoore, and the maintainers were spending till 10 o'clock at night to move components and parts from one aircraft to another, and before you knew it, you were losing those highly trained maintainers. There was dissatisfaction, and I think we started to revisit that space, and with the BCA in 2013 and 2014 with the sequester. So it's good to hear that you think that we're on the right trajectory now.
Not done yet, right?
Yeah.
I mean, this took us a while to get in, but we definitely are down track and making good speed.
Thank you. General
No,
Neller, your
I would
view.
agree with that. I mean, it's not happening as fast as we would like, but we're flying more hours. We got more aircraft ready. I mean, the forces that have been forward deployed and on the rotation, I mean, they've always been ready. Maybe not as early in their pre-deployment cycles we would like, but they've been ready. It's been the depth and the capability in the bench, those that are getting ready to go and those that just came back. And that's always a problem because you've got manpower, personnel turnovers and things like that. So as the CNO said, I mean, money is not the end, but it sure does help. And so we've got, and it helps the people in this room because you got to hire people, you got to put workers on the line, you got to train them, and if you can't count on there being a source of income for you to put, to hire the workers and build the parts that we need, we're not going to have readiness. I mean, we still struggle with some parts availability. Like I said, we're doing the current mission, we're trying to fix the stuff that we got that's legacy, and we're trying to buy new. And that's a real difficult, there's always puts and takes and trades and things like that. So, but I think we're in a much better place, but it is fragile, it could go away. I mean, the fact is the Budget Control Act is still a law of the land until 2021. And so here we are in fiscal year 19. I really appreciate the fact that you know when the president budgets due, because I have no idea. And so, because that ties to when we have to go testify. But for the last time, boom. And, but so we'll go through this year. We got the money. We're going to make good use of the money. Hopefully have a budget on time in 20. But there's going to have to be an agreement because the Budget Control Act is still a law. And as bad as that sounds, there is, if we can't get agreement on a budget or on a continuing resolution, the default is the BCA. And that would be not a good place for us to go. It would be a bad place. So I'm confident that Congress knows that, the administration knows that, certainly the Department of Defense knows that, and the Service Secretary. So everybody's going to work to try and have that happen. In the meantime, you're going to get the best Marine Corps, Coast Guard, and Navy that we get funding to provide. And I agree with the Vice. I mean, I think we can take our people for granted. The people are down there working hard to keep the airplanes flying or the trucks running, or out there. I was up at Bridgeport, about 6 foot of snow, and the Marines are out there snowshoeing around, and and they're like, learning to be miserable. It's a wonderful thing. And there's probably some people in this room say, well, you don't have to train to be miserable. You are absolutely incorrect. You have to learn what it's like to be in that environment and what it is to be cold and to spend the night out there when it's minus 18 because you'll find out who the players are. And so all this comes together to give you a ready force. And so we are making progress, but you can't take it for granted.
Absolutely. I'd like to shift a little bit towards the great power competition side for a moment. And, you know, on the Coast Guard side, you've got Cutter Bertolf out there right now in the Pacific, attached with and working with 7th Fleet. Can you talk about your perspective as from the Coast Guard side of how you contribute with the new order and the new relationship with China and what that means?
We've been, as you said, Pete, we sailed Bertolf during, and that was right during the height of the lapse of the government, and those folks, that was a tough goodbye on the pier. But anyway, we're past that. And they sailed there, so there's kind of two parts to the Coast Guard's engagement. First of all, we've been in the Indo-Pacific for 150 years. We've been over as far west as you can go and as far south as you can go in that ocean, and as far north as you can go. And so we've been operating there. And over the course of the last 30 years, we've been the leaders of these multilateral organizations like the North Pacific Coast Guard Forum and the Arctic Coast Guard Forum. And so we literally have these cooperation with our near peer competitors that are right now, it's heating up, you know, and
Right.
and that's a result of our authorities and law enforcement, our authorities for all the different other missions that we have on the high seas. And these relationships have kind of borne up through good times and bad. And I think they're a living example of the cooperate where you can. And that's what we're doing. Now, on the other hand, we train with the Navy. We don't consider ourselves a small part of the Navy. We're the world's greatest Coast Guard. So as that, we intend and we train to be complementary to what the Navy's doing. We send a Coast Guard major cutter to RIMPAC, and our guys work up. We've got down, of course, with SouthCom down in the East Pac. We are the detection and monitoring and interdiction arm of Southern Command, and I could go around the globe, Northern Arabian Gulf. So we train and work up and exercise with the Navy, and we're prepared to exercise whatever parts we have. I think what we really bring out there, and this deployment is what I hope to bring. The Coast Guard, we demonstrate kind of legitimate, professional, rules-based maritime operations out at sea. And they look at us a little differently.
Right.
Just because the color of our ships or their past history with us. And so I'm optimistic. I mean, it's not going to turn the world upside down, but it'll help, I think, the cause. And that's why we're out there.
Haven't we had a program, you know, with the Chinese for, I think it's coming up towards 20 years, where we've had Chinese shipwriters on Coast Guard ships out there routinely?
About once a year, there's a time of year when the bad guy, the pirate fishermen, operate in the North Pacific. And so that's been a constant mission. And most of the time, not always, but most of them are Chinese fishermen that are the guys that we're after. So it has been very advantageous for us to have, if I'm going to board a Chinese flagged vessel, to have a Chinese law enforcement officer on board. Now, we're looking at that now. The world's changing a little bit, and we've got to look at that through the eyes of the nation with a different focus, and that's what's going on right now. But that's been advantageous for us over the years to have that kind of connection with them.
I think it's a great example of the unique position that you're in with your authorities.
Well, if we think about expanding the competitive space, you know, that phrase is in the National Defense Strategy. I think the maritime partnership between all three of our forces, but particularly the Coast Guard, because they get into, like I said, law enforcement authorities, and they have partnerships in history that are different than ours. That helps us to expand that space quite a bit.
Well, I'd like to keep on this theme, but this one statement from the NDS, the National Defense Strategy, stood out for me. It said, "Today we are emerging from a period of strategic atrophy, aware that our competitive military advantage has been eroding." So to continue with the DoD side of this, we've talked about readiness. How does the Navy and the Marines feel about the steps and advancements in lethality and capability?
Yeah, I'll just pick up where I think Secretary Gertz left off in terms of we've got to be doing some tangible things to speed the process up. And he, I think, gave some great examples of where he's really been effective at making things move faster. And a lot of that's just been through his personal energy, moving things almost, by the force of his personality to go forward. And we were talking a little bit about this at our table. It may be a strategic Achilles heel of our system that it is just not biased towards quickness and agility. And so it's not because anybody's out there trying to purposely slow it down, it's just the system is where it is. We've been incentivizing different things. Right now, I'll tell you that speed to market, speed to the fleet matters, particularly with some of these decisive technologies, information technologies, electric weapons, high energy lasers. You don't want to be the second Navy on the water with the high energy laser, right? And so this idea of speed matters. We've got to get that sense of urgency. Everybody in the system has got to be biased towards, okay, we're going to study this, then we're going to make a decision to do it, and then we got to do it, and we've got to go fast. Material matters, and the first to the fight with the best stuff, that's a significant difference. We got to do better there. So.
General Neller?
Well, the strategy tells the naval force, to focus in a geographical area against a particular competitor. I mean, and they publish a program. They say, here's the players I got on my team, and here's the stuff they got, and they read ours, and they know what we got. And you start to look at it, and you go, hey, I got to improve my game in these areas. And as the CNO said, you can't do that fast enough. So nobody's looking for a fight. In fact, I think we'd be in the best position not to have a fight if both sides thought that it was not worth their cost to take on the other one. And so deterrence is our #1 mission. But whether it's long-range precision strike, whether it's better information network defense, whether it's protected mobility, whether it's integrated logistics, or the movement of logistics, whether it's air defense or missile defense, whether it's the different weapons, whether it be laser, directed energy, I mean, all the stuff that's working and that everybody else is working. Mm-hmm. But we got to compete. So we got to be there. I mean, in the strategy, they talk about 4 types of forces: the contact force, the blunt force, the surge force, and then the homeland defense. Okay, and we're all in the contact force. I mean, your naval force is your force that's out there every day in the contact zone, ready to take contact. And you got to have the ability to absorb that contact and deliver a blowback if you have to. Or you have to have enough capabilities to make the other guy think, it's not worth it, because if I do, I'm going to get back more than I'm going to give. So we're trying to increase those capabilities of all platforms and all Marine forces. And so part of that naval force, I mean, that's what we're looking at. And it's the concepts that we've developed together: littoral ops, contested environment, expeditionary advanced-based operations. These are naval concepts, and that where we try to fight as a naval team to control the sea space and deny it to the adversary, and at the same time have our network. So I mean, there's a lot of really interesting stuff going on. I agree with the CNO. Sometimes the acquisition system just doesn't seem to work in our favor, and because speed is important, and because you don't, that was a great line. You don't want to be the second one with anything. And the historical example where we've gone out and we've learned, and maybe we took a loss in a certain battle. I don't want to lose to learn anymore. Okay, we can't afford to lose and then, oh yeah, we didn't know that. And we're supposed to train and learn, because when we go out there, we might just have one shot at this. And if you got one shot, and we got to win. So there's no doubt that everybody's focused and paying attention to that. But I mean, the time in our history where we could have had something and then we could recover, I'm not sure the environment is going to be that forgiving in the future.
Well, for Admiral Ray, to me, when I think of improved capability for the Coast Guard, I think of one thing: icebreakers. And when you look at the Arctic, that space up there, the importance of it, the fact that because of the situation that there's more and more sea space up there, more and more maneuver space, and it's pretty evident that, at least to people, I'm sure, sitting here, that you just can't not be there. So where are we on the Coast Guard's efforts to improve that situation and stake that out as a priority for procurement?
Well, I haven't been on my computer in the last couple hours to see exactly where the budget was on that, but and we're this close to getting the funds we need to execute the acquisition of the next heavy icebreaker. The first heavy icebreaker. We haven't built one in 50 years, our nation has. So just the underlying, I think everybody gets it, there's an ocean where there used to be ice. Everybody gets it that there's geostrategic competition up there that didn't exist as recently as 10 years ago or 5 years ago. And so what the Coast Guard does is provide access and presence, and we need heavy icebreakers to provide both of those year-round, in the Arctic specifically. So we're this close. We expect to award the contract for, you know, detailed design and construction sometime this third quarter of this year. And working with the Navy, it's been a great partnership. We've got an integrated program office, and Assistant Secretary Gertz actually came and went through one of our program reviews the other day, and that's the kind of support we're getting. So, and we are further along on this acquisition, which is pretty complex by Coast Guard standards. We are further along on this than we would ever be were it not for the cooperation with the Navy. And the backside of this Coast Guard cutter Polar Star is supposed to arrive, well, she won't get back home for another month, but she's been down in McMurdo in Antarctica, breaking that out for the last few weeks. And so, and she is, that is a testimony to extending the life of a ship that we don't want to repeat that model. It's just been too long.
No, it's 50 years is a long time. I think aircraft carriers maybe, but small ships, not so good.
And aircraft carriers get that great midlife, you know,
Yes, rehab.
renovation really is what it is. It's refueling and topside and everything gets done, so.
Well, I'm going to ask one more question, and I'd like the audience to think about coming up to the mic and turn it over to you for your participation, which we welcome. And just a quick question, you know, many this week have discussed the impact of new technologies and innovations such as additive manufacturing, artificial intelligence, autonomous systems. Also, we've heard a lot about the competition for talent in some of these technological areas. And so just wanted to ask maybe Commandant Neller to start with that, but that's, it's clear we are going in this direction. How do you feel about your ability to get after those types of areas for the Marine Corps?
Well, the additive manufacturing, we've been after this for 3 years, and I think everybody has, but I mean, to me, it's the most disruptive capability we could procure to kind of untether ourselves as an expeditionary force from the supply system. And as the technology, the machines to print in polymers and now in different metals get smaller and hopefully cheaper, you're going to see a proliferation of those things everywhere. So I got a Marine over here telling me if I give him $16 million, he can like build a space shuttle or something. So, and so I may take him up on that after I get $3.4 billion to fix Camp Lejeune. But you know, these things are happening. They're happening around us. I think we're part of it. I think some of the things are easier to operationalize, like additive manufacturing now. What we do with artificial intelligence, what we do, CNO mentioned directed energy and lasers, that's happening. Whether it's hypervelocity projectiles, whether it's you know, ability to put things in space, increase the resiliency of the network up there. I mean, there's a lot of stuff going on, and we're all in within capability. So it's a great time to be in the military because we're at the front edge of a lot of these technologies, and we've got great, really smart people that, you know, that want to be in the service, and we've got to provide that capability for them to use their talent. And whether they stay for 4 or 40, eventually they're going to get out and they're going to go out and work for industry or do whatever they're going to do. And like all of us, I mean, you know, people ask me what you think about as you get near the end. I mean, it's been true when General Krulak said, we make Marines, we win battles, and we send better citizens back to the nation. I could say that about all our services. and we're blessed to have really good young men and women that will still want to join and wear the uniform. And they're going to go back in society and they're going to contribute. Now there is competition for talent, and you know, Marines know there's no way that we can pay them what they're worth in the civilian market. So we got to figure out other ways to incentivize their desire to serve, whether it be monies we can give them or other benefits, or just give them the best gear because they really enjoy what they're doing, or the responsibility of being able to be a leader. So there's a lot of stuff going on, and it's really exciting.
It is. So, give you a crack at that.
Sure. I've been talking a lot about just a recent trip I made to our boot camp up in Great Lakes. And, the Navy's growing, right? We're on our way to a bigger Navy, more powerful Navy, and a big part of that is the people. And as you pointed out, the skills that are going to move our Navy, Marine Corps, and Coast Guard forward some of them are the same that got us here, and some of them are quite different in terms of moving forward. And then there's just the competition for the talent. It's a very small portion of the population that has the physical and academic and all the skills and the propensity to serve, and that's a very hotly competed for cadre of our nation. So I was up there, and if you ever want to just get completely inspired, I just recommend you go up to Great Lakes and watch a boot camp graduation. We do it every Friday. And this particular Friday, and each one of our services does a similar version. This particular Friday, we were graduating 1,070 sailors to enter into the fleet. And I will tell you that if you haven't been to Great Lakes in the last 6 months, you really haven't been to Great Lakes. Because in response to this great power competition, we've been ratcheting up I would say the toughness factor of what it means to graduate up there. And we've been making physical standards more challenging. We've been doing a tremendous amount more damage control, firefighting, line handling, team building, skills that will make that sailor much more able to be part of a combat team when they report to their first command. So it's harder to get through boot camp than it's been in a long time. And in response to that, our recruits are graduating in higher percentages. There's less attrition than there has been. The retention is going up. And that's the macroscopic graduation rate, but also even the day-to-day number of recruits that are sick in quarters and don't feel good and want a day off, that's going away, right? This team is really responding to this higher standard, this challenge. That's why they joined the Navy or the Marine Corps or the Coast Guard, right? There's lots of options that they have. To the point that Bob made, they could write their check and go anywhere in the world. They came here. And so they've really been, it's really been an inspiring thing to watch this cadre of our youth respond. You got to ask yourself why, because the Commandant said we can't pay them as much, and oh, by the way, as a bonus, we're going to separate you from your family for 7 months out of a year and forward deploy you. And I think it has to do with this thing I talked about over the VTC at the beginning, the value proposition that the services provide, this sense of purpose, of doing something bigger than yourself, a noble calling. So we have to make sure that we behave consistently with that talk. So fast forward, we get through the graduation ceremony. I get a chance to meet the honor graduate, the #1 graduate of boot camp that year. She had scored the top scores and everything and graduated #1. And I was meeting this young lady from Austin, Texas, and her family was there. And I said, hey, well, tell me a little bit about yourself. And she said, well, yeah, I'm from Austin, and I went to school down there. I said, oh, good. Did you get an associate's degree or something? Did you finish your degree? She's like, yeah, actually I did. I finished with a double major from UT in physics and chemistry. I said, really? Why are you here?
Wow.
And so this is an indication of the talent that we are getting. It's a privilege to be able to just be part of that team, never mind the extra privilege to lead that team. And so we really owe it to them to do everything we can to honor that commitment.
Thanks. From the Coast Guard side, do you feel you're getting the kind of workforce you need to leverage this technology and to attract and retain them for the future?
We're absolutely attracting them. I think the Coast Guard mission sets attract some of the brightest young women and men in the nation. We always have, and that's just a benefit, I think, of our separate mission sets. So we've got something for everybody, and the cyber realm is no exception. But going back to what we said before, the retention of these folks is, now there's a group of people, if we provide them, I'm sure, money's not a motivator for any of the guys that join our service. Because of what they're allowed to do, the contributions they can make, I'm talking about cyber in general. I've just got to make sure that I continually provide them the training and the exposure so that they're not getting stale. If they feel like they're getting stale, they'll leave me. And so I've got to keep them on board. And you can say that about any of our specialties, but it's especially true with some of the higher end stuff.
Okay, I think we can open it up now. We have a person standing by. Please, only thing we ask is you tell us who you are and ask a question.
Thanks, Admiral. Thanks, General, for being here. Thanks for making West a priority. We know your schedules are too blocked. My name's Kurt Hamill. I have a question about industry mobilization for wartime. In World War II, arguably one of the key factors in our victory in World War II was because we were able to mobilize industry, and the industry was able to turn out ships and tanks, et cetera, in proper time. I now work, I'm retired SWO. I now work for Esri. It's a software company. Our software is going out on ships and submarines and NavSpec war today. My question is about the information war that's already started. Arguably, the first salvos have already been fired, right? Russia, China, North Korea, Iran, non-state actors have already fired those first salvos in the information war. So my question is about us here in the information industry. Are we now on a wartime footing? Or have we been moved up to a wartime footing? What does a wartime footing look like from your perspectives for the information industry?
I don't think the salvos have been fired. I think they're firing. Okay, we're at war right now in cyberspace. We've been at war for maybe a decade. And if General Nakasone were here, or Major General Glavy from R4 Cyber, they would tell you that they're pouring boiling oil over the castle walls every day because people are trying to get inside. And so ability, whether it's your administrative network or your tactical networks, your secure networks, I think we all got to recognize that there's people out there with various motivations and representing various groups, maybe nation states, maybe organizations or whatever, that are trying to get inside your networks, and they're trying to compromise your data. So I think if you're asking me if I think we're at war, I say yes. And it's not just the uniformed people in here, it's all of you too, because you got intellectual property that needs to be protected. And we all got to do a better job. We don't need to give anybody out there any more of an advantage than they may have already gained. And I'll just leave it at that. So, I am not a cyber person. I'm not a programmer. I don't write code. I'm an operations guy, but I'm watching enough of this stuff to understand, pay attention that this is, the war could end before it begins. If you lose your ability to navigate, your ability to do position, navigation, and timing, your ability to deliver precision munitions, if you're denied that capability, you're hugely disadvantaged. So to me, and I've said this before, whoever can defend their network or bring it back in the fastest manner, because it's going to get attacked and it's going to get degraded, whoever can defend and be more resilient than the other person, they're probably going to win.
Yeah, I'll just pick up where the Commandant left off, is that I couldn't agree with him more that information, that's contested space now, right? And the competition, the conflict is on there, the contest. So how do you organize for that? And so you're a surface warfare officer, and probably when you joined the Navy, there was kind of 3 warfighting domains that we talked about in the Navy, subsets of the maritime domain. You had undersea, surface, and air, right? Well, and they had community leaders and they had warfare development centers, and they had a process to bring people in and make them surface warriors, aviators, you name it. There's a fourth pillar now, and it's information warfare. And if you look at the structure of that in the Navy, it has all of the structure of our traditional warfighting domain. So there's a 3-star type commander at the head of the information force. There's a 3-star on my staff. There's an operational arm in 10th Fleet, and Vice Admiral White is there, you know, competing and contesting in this space. And so, and then with respect to what the Commandant said in terms of building systems that are designed to compete and win in this space, some of that is being resilient to attack, some of that is being able to conduct an attack. And so folks like Admiral Becker at SPAWAR, who's in the room somewhere, and there he is right here, and other folks are designing these systems to be superior in this space as well. I'll tell you, it's very fast moving, right? And so you've got to, if there's a place where agility is more appropriate than anywhere else, it's in information space. But I think we're organized and resourced to get after it. We just have to get that speed up to a relevant speed for this competition, this contest.
Admiral Ray, anything to throw in on that?
Yeah, I think that, you know, this is not just a dot mill thing either. The maritime transportation system, which our national defense depends on to move all the equipment and people that we need to move, it is a just-in-time system that is just as vulnerable as any other system in the nation. And I recall a couple of years ago, I was the commander out of the Pacific area, and I'd look out over the anchorage in San Francisco Bay, and they had a longshoreman strike, which was, didn't have anything, you know, thankfully didn't have anything to do with us. But, and the ships at Anchorage just grew day by day. Within less than a week, we had 20 ships at Anchorage. The average is about 4, and that was a longshoreman strike. And then you think of a malicious attack on the information systems that control that transportation. That's something we really got to get our hands around. I mean, we're working it. The Department of Homeland Security is working it, and other agencies, but that is just a half a step behind our military considerations.
Agree, and just for all three of you, because I've had the advantage of being here for 2.5 days and listening, another piece of this is the fact that industry, a large part of our audience is industry, needs to deliver you systems that can be secure.
Yeah.
And that's been a big theme that we've heard throughout.
And please secure your own systems.
Amen.
Thanks.
I'm Dennis Riley with Gigamon. I too was going to ask about information operations, so maybe we can take a different tack. I was interested in hearing more about defensive cyber operations and the cyber protection teams in particular. And given all the trade-offs with priorities, where do you rank cyber? Because obviously we can't afford everything we like. And anything you can say about planned investments going forward in DCO and CPTs would be appreciated.
Yeah. Well, I think Admiral Daly asked a question, hey, what characterizes your request, right? What are those things that are high priority? And, you know, I've learned from Admiral Lesher here in the front of the room, the biggest priority is balance, right? And that, I think, is the path to power in a naval force. And so we'll consider cyber, as I said, what greater demonstration of our priority is the entire creation of a warfare area, right? And everything that we've invested into that. So I think that our actions have signaled that this gets a high priority. The manning of the cyber protection teams and everything is right on track. It's probably not enough at the end of the day. We're taking a look at how many of those people we need doing that mission analysis, but I think that you can count on that being a pretty high priority for all of us. I'm pretty safe speaking for everybody up here.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Afternoon, General and Admirals. Nice to meet you. It's an honor to be able to be here and hear you speak. So Kurt Danis, I work for a sub-unified command under Strategic Command. And some of the thoughts that I was thinking about is Joint Pub 3 TAC 12, cyber operations, talks about 3 lines of effort. So DODIN, OCO, and DCO. And so some of those things deal with some of the titles, Title 10, Title 50, things like that. And so I was kind of wondering about those kind of things because I'm seeing an article in Proceedings by a young lieutenant, Academy grad, MIT, and he's concerned about getting on the keyboard and trying to, you know, do these things, and I'm thinking, oh my gosh, we need these officers to really be at the strategic level and not so much at the technical or technical level. So
Can I take you on right there?
yes, sir.
He's a lieutenant, right?
He is.
I need him to be pretty tactically skilled, right? In time, we'll take that lieutenant and make him a strategist. Right now, I need that lieutenant to be able to fly his aircraft better than any other naval aviator in the planet. I need him to be able to drive his ship better than any ship driver on the planet. I need him to be able to dive his submarine, fight his cyber team better than anybody on the planet, right? So in time, we'll get to make that lieutenant a strategist, but his mind is probably, if he's focused on being the best cyber warfare officer, right, it's probably right where I need it.
And in fact, he was talking about that and how his peers in the sister services.
But wait, there's more.
Sister services are getting like 6 months of training, but he only got like 2 weeks. So,
Really?
Right. So AFIT, Air Force Institute of Technology, they have a pretty great course. I've been through it myself. So I'm wondering how the Navy is going to prepare their officers at the technical or tactical level.
So, you know, I can get you that article so you could
Yeah.
take a look.
Such a prestigious publication as the Naval Institute Proceedings. If they're publishing it, I better pay close attention, so I'll get right on that.
All right. We'll take a look. Thanks.
Good afternoon, General, Admirals. Thank you for your great comments and your exceptional leadership.
You said General.
I'm not with him. My name is Everett Hayes.
Thank you.
My name is Everett Hayes, and I'm with Sus Consulting. I was really listening to you when you talked about the multidimensional warfare aspect of things. You can't swing a cat around here, a dead cat, without hitting somebody that's talking about cloud or cyber at AFCEA West. The thing that I'm worried about and would ask you about is recently we heard Mr. Putin talk about this hypersonic or hypersonic missile that can kill a ship. We don't know if it's true or not. I read an article just recently about anti-submarine warfare, how we were kind of having some problems there, some issues with the possibility of a torpedo coming in and destroying an aircraft carrier or a ship. So what I wanted to ask you is, are we focused too much on fighting or learning to fight the cyber war when our adversaries may be coming up with some kinetic things that, you know, back in the day when we used to set zebra on a ship in GQ, we worried about the kinetic thing. And I just wonder if you think we should maybe be focusing a little bit more on the kinetic things that may be coming from our adversaries as well as those cyber attacks that we know are there.
Yeah, you know, again, it goes back to balance, right? And so I think that as you appreciate the Navy's approach with partnering with the Marine Corps as always and the Coast Guard, you would find that it's a pretty balanced portfolio. I hesitate to get into the specifics because it just gives away too much information. But with respect to those systems that you talked about, I'm confident that we're paying the appropriate amount of attention to the balanced portfolio of kinetic and non-kinetic effects.
Thank you, sir.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, gentlemen. Paul Zolja from Task and Purpose.
Hey, did you hear my announcement at the beginning?
I believe you said sort of reporters go to the end or something like that. Or
The end meant the end.
The end?
Yes. Could we?
Can I just be Paul Zolger a guy? Because I think the question is
No,
relevant
I
to...
really would like to make sure, is the next gentleman in line an attendee? I just want to make sure, I'm trying to get to the audience first. And CNO said he'd stay behind, for instance, answer questions. And so I'd like to do that.
And
Thank you.
is General Neller staying behind as well, sir?
Well, I don't know.
Depends on what the question is. But
You
can't ask it, so yeah, I'll stick
It's about the
around.
theme of great power competition. It's part of the conference. I'm just asking about basically what the training is for great power competition and what the services are specifically doing to train to that effect. Our Marines and sailors actually training for GPS-denied environments, uncontested airspace, and that kind of thing.
I look forward to answering that question after the session.
Thank you, sir.
Good afternoon. James Harkins, a retired Marine. Last year I asked a question about population and manpower. Vice Admiral Reyes, your question about icebreakers is exactly the question that I asked about 2 days ago. Last year the CNO asked about 30 ships and 20,000 more sailors. Congratulations on getting your 20,000 more sailors. My question is...
40,000.
Okay, 40,000 is better than 20. Can't go along with that. Can't go
I
along
agree,
with
about
that.
twice as good, if my math is right.
Thank you very much. For the Commandant of the Marine Corps, though, I'd like to talk about acquisitions and contracting in two different realms. Number one, I understand the realm at Camp Lejeune, North Carolina, and the natural disaster that took place there. My question also dovetails with how are we doing with the privatization of military housing at Camp Pendleton, where I understand some electric meters are plugged into street lights. Some of them are plugged into two different units, and there's only one meter bill. How are we doing with correcting some of those issues on the morale side, which I'm sure all these folks over here are concerned with too if they're in base housing at Camp Pendleton?
So I've investigated that because I've read all those stories too. And so everybody up at Pendleton, if you think because we were directed by the Department of Defense to go to this energy program where you would baseline where you lived, and then based on the type of house you lived in, you would be prorated your electricity bill, where you might have to pay or you might get a rebate. Amazingly, people that live on base who worry if we live on the same street and he's got 3 teenage children and my spouse and I are never home and he's got something else, I don't know why he gets a rebate and I got to pay $25. Although if I lived out in town, nobody seems to be concerned I'm paying San Diego Gas and Electric like $450 a month for my utility bill, but that's another story. So people have been told that if they think there's something wrong with their utility bill, that they can have the housing people come out and they can do an energy survey to determine if they are getting, being billed when they shouldn't be getting billed. There's one particular housing area where this has been more, the concern has been greater than others. And, we've gone with the vendor and we've asked them to check it. And I'm still, there's still some concern about that. But whenever I hear about it, I go up and we try to investigate it, and we get the base commander to go up there and look at it. Other areas, it's not a concern. Although I will tell you, everybody's monitoring their utility bill because, they don't want to have to pay. About 1/3 get money back, about 1/3, they get nothing, and about 1/3 get a rebate. So most of it's tied to your legitimate usage, but there's a couple areas that we're still watching because we're hearing, but I can't prove the fact that maybe our houses were not all on independent meters, which is what we want.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Good afternoon. My name is Mike Mann. I'm a retired surface warfare officer. So one of the major lessons learned that came out of Desert Storm, or the corrective actions that came out of Desert Storm, was the establishment of JIFCOM to improve our joint warfighting capability. We all know we fight jointly today, and we clearly dominate the battlefield in CENTCOM AOR. But that's not a near-peer competitor kind of fight. And my question is, are we organized today to bring together the entire joint force to be ready for that fight? And do we need some organizational changes to improve our warfighting capability to deal with that threat?
You're talking about CENTCOM or anyone?
Do we need JIFCOM back is essentially...
Yeah, I think it's kind of the root of the question. I'll tell you, it's a more global and integrated fight, and I think we are making some adjustments so that we've got a more global integrated approach to that. And some of those might be organizational, some of those are sort of conceptual and command and control types of changes. But it's a constant assessment and adaptation process that goes on to respond to the security environment. So I think we're in pretty good shape. It's a responsive process.
No, I think in the Joint Staff, and I was there when JIFCOM was disestablished, the J7, which is the training arm of the Joint Staff, all the folks down at Suffolk, they never left. So there is a capability to train at the joint environment. There's people down there that travel around, they exercise the COCOMs, they exercise the fleets and the MEFs and the numbered armies and the numbered air forces, and they make them do their Joint Task Force certification. So that's there, and that's what JIFCOM did. You know, and I believe there's enough recognition. I mean, there isn't of a requirement to be able to operate in a joint environment. You should never take that for granted. I mean, our ability to operate jointly, we've been doing it for 17 years, but more at a lower level. But, you know, it takes constant practice. But there isn't a naval force that doesn't leave the east or west coast of the United States that doesn't, as they sail across their respective oceans, and that are not doing operational training, working with the Air Force, doing, you know, restricted emissions or turning off their networks and doing stuff. So we're, you know, the point about fighting a peer competitor, you know, we're totally focused on that every day and everything that we do, whether it's training at 29 Palms, whether it's training as we sail across the ocean. I mean, we're working this thing all the time.
Okay, thanks. I'm afraid this will have to be the last question. We're also going to save time for the press at the end to come up and talk to the chiefs if they have some questions. So this will be our last question before we wrap.
Good afternoon, sir. I'm Lieutenant Commander Raja. I'm from the US Naval War College, and I'm so honored to be here along with my class of 2019 with staff, and I'm from India. I have a question with a background. Today I was fortunate enough to go and witness the cutting-edge technologies in weapons and sensors, and it was exhilarating. However, yesterday there was a cowardly terrorist attack on security personnel in India, and about 44 people died and still counting. Now, what intrigues me is how has technology worked towards asymmetric warfare? Because we understand that our enemy, when he doesn't equal us technologically, he is going to go for less cost-effective and effective means to bring down billions of dollars of equipment and priceless lives of soldiers, airmen, and the security personnel. Also, I see that the conventional weapons which we use for warfare, we try to apply that to counter terrorist and asymmetric warfare. So my two questions are, what is technology doing? Is there a drive to bring down asymmetric warfare or to do something? And if America is already self-sufficient in that, can't that be used as a tool to add fillip to the American diplomacy to other countries like mine or any other, most of the countries who are facing issues with the terrorists? So these are my questions. Thank you.
Is that your thesis?
Not yet, sir, but I plan to do it once I go back.
I think that we should get credit for your thesis if we answer this question. All right. Hey, well, listen, I think that particularly in information technologies, right, and the ability to find deep patterns in information and even isolate down to an individual and find out how any particular individual may be departing from what we might think a normal individual would do, that would highlight the need to pay attention. I think that those have tremendous potential to help us continue to compete in this type of battle. You're exactly right. Our enemies are studying us very closely, and they're not going to go to our point of strength they're going to go to our point of vulnerability. And so we've just got to be paying attention to that spectrum and make sure we're also shoring up our capabilities in where we're vulnerable. And I'll say also that as we do this, the things that we can learn from our allies and partners is indispensable, right? And so you're going to have insights in India that I simply cannot get to in the United States, but by virtue of teaming together, sharing those insights as completely as possible, we're going to combine to develop the best possible sense of the environment as possible. So I think that allies and partners, and the perspectives they bring, the intelligence and information that they bring to this type of a fight is going to be indispensable to winning.
Well, I'd like to thank
Thank you.
Admiral Richardson, General Neller, Admiral Ray for making time for us today. Their time is precious. We've got a book for each of you, Redefining the Modern Military, the Intersection of Profession and Ethics by Terrell Mayfield and Nathan Finney. It's a Naval Institute press book with an AFCEA bookmark, but it doesn't come close. It's just a token to our gratitude to you all for giving us this time. So let's give them a big hand, please.
All right, good to see you. Kodiak, that sounds good.
Thanks, Bob.